Should we finally get to the third team?
Let's get to the third team and do it relatively quickly. Don't make me yell at you.
No promises.
I'll
Do you
let
want
you
to
go
start this one
first.
off?
Yeah, you know what? I'll go first. In goal, I got Stefan Fry. At right back, I've got Alex Roldan. At center back, I've got Dave Romney. At other center back, I've got Jack Mayer. Daniel Lovitz is my left back. You can see a theme here. I got Darlington Nagbe in my 6 role with an honorable mention, and I mentioned this in the second team, to Junior Moreno from FCC, and I'll explain that in a little bit. At my number 10 role, I got Carlos Heel, as you mentioned before. On the left, I got Daniel Shallowy. On the right, I've got Facundo Torres. And up top, I've got Alan Polito, and I've got Julian Carranza.
Okay. Okay.
What do you got?
I have got Joe Willis in goal. And let me know when you're good, and I'll move
Yeah,
on.
good.
Okay. Defenders, left back to right back. I've got some fun ones in here. I
Good.
got Kai Wagner at left back. I've got Yamar. I've got Tim
Well, hold
Parker.
on. Freeze. Sorry. Didn't you put Yamar
I know, but
in your.
I swapped it for McGraw.
Was McGraw on your third team? You just flip flopped him?
Yeah, I just moved McGraw to the second team.
That's a lie, but go on.
Yamar, Tim Parker, and not for the memes, Ryan Hollingshead at right back. Then in the 2 midfield positions, I've got Ricky Puig and I've got Artur. So I've changed the formation a little from the previous ones. So only 2 attacking mids this time. I've gone for Ryan Gauld and Facundo Torres. And then the 2 strikers for me, Georgios Giacomakis and Brian White.
Nice. Um, Again, relatively close here. We'll talk again, defenders. We'll talk about anything that we don't have, haven't talked about already. Stefan Fry, I talked about Seattle being really good. He's one of the reasons why. Best goals against average, most shutouts, 7th in our favorite stat, PSXG plus minus. 3rd least amount of goals conceded with number 28. At 36 years old now, I think he is. The dude's still balling. So, love that from him. I think he still is one of the guys who I would have loved to see in a U.S. men's national team kit at some point. I think it's a shame he never got in. But he is one of the big reasons that Seattle is and have been as good as they are and were. Another guy who will continue to take this team as far as they go.
Yeah, and I went Joe Willis for basically all the reasons that you had talked about before. He's had such a strong season. He's the goalkeeper for the best defensive team in the league. His save percentage is really high. Maybe there was some bias in me putting Daniel ahead of him, but he was unquestionably in the top 3 for me. And I would understand why you would put him at 2, but that goes against my agenda,
as all of your picks do. Talk to me about your right back then. Talk to me about Mr. Ryan.
Oh, Ryan Hollingshead. We love some Ryan Hollingshead. I can't imagine he's strong in your numbers because he plays in 17 different positions a season. But he was good across the board per 90. His percentiles were really good. And I feel like you would think his attacking numbers would be stronger because he basically plays as a striker in like a quarter of the games in a season. And they were decent. There were some good ones in there. 92nd percentile non-penalty goals. But his defensive numbers were strong too. I mean, he was 98th percentile in aerials 87th percentile in tackles, 91st percentile in interceptions. He was involved in the buildup as well. 86th percentile in progressive passes, 86th percentile in touches. He looked really well rounded this season. I think he's had a strong year, and I almost feel like the versatility is even another added bonus to him. He can play just so many different positions in the field. I was happy to get him in here for non-meme reasons, kind of like Brian White for you. It's kind of weird that we talk about these guys being memes of the podcast, and not in a bad way. Just like they're just important. I'd call like important parts of our podcast lore. but I think he legitimately is in the conversation to be in one of these teams, in my opinion.
I'll tell you, he's not even on my list
Yeah,
because he
probably.
doesn't he doesn't hit any of the minute totals because, as you mentioned, he's so spread. I
Yeah,
do have a feeling though that if he did, or if I made some special exception, he'd blow him out of the water, no doubt.
there's always special exceptions for Ryan Hollingshead on this podcast.
So for me at the right back spot, Alex Roldan, again, just going with the whole theme of Seattle defenders, second least goals conceded in the league. You're going to look good in the numbers, right? Fifth most tackles made, fifth least fouls when making defensive tackles, which is great. Fourth most blocked crosses, fifth best passing percentage, second most completed crosses. So both sides of the ball very, very good, which we know about. We know that he's a very good attacking player, but he's done very well defensively as well. I think he deserves a shout for being a staple of the very good defensive team.
Okay.
Now you've thrown Kai Wagner in there. Tell me why.
Yeah, I mean, Kai's consistently one of the best fullbacks in the league. And I don't think this was his strongest season by any regard. I think he's had stronger seasons, but I think he was definitely still solid enough that I got him in here. He was, as kind of expected for him, very strong in the attack, 98th percentile in shot creating actions, 97th in assists. I'm not going to go into the other statistics. They're way too much of a mouthful. 93rd percentile on passes attempted, but was pretty strong in some certain defensive metrics as well. I mean, 74th percentile in tackles, 92nd in interceptions, 86th in blocks. So I definitely don't think it was his best season. I think we've seen better from him, but I certainly don't think it was a bad season for him at all. And, as we've talked about as you talked about with Roldan, he's, a consistent fullback for one of the stronger defensive teams in the Eastern Conference and in the league in general.
Yeah, for him, again, I had 14 left backs that I looked at. He was dribbled by the 11th most times, and he had the ninth best tackle success rate. So, in some key areas there, he was relatively weak for me in the way that I analyzed it. He had the least amount of clearances, likely because he was so far up the field all the time. He blocked the least amount of crosses. And he also was the second least successful dribbles. So he was 13th out of 14 in successful dribbles, which makes a little bit of sense. But it means that from a coaching standpoint, the way I analyze this, right, is he can put in great services from early areas. But if I need him to beat a player and get to the line to cut it back, he's not as great at doing that. Which means that he can be scouted relatively easily and neutralized. And then his passing percentage was kind of low too. So he was close. He was, I think, 6 or 7 on my list out of, so he was like third or fourth guy out. But as you mentioned, not his best season. There were people who were better, like
Yep.
Daniel Lovitz.
Yeah. Tell
Yeah.
me about him.
So Dan Lovitz, fourth most tackles, second most clearances, fourth most block crosses, most accurate long balls, most total passes, most accurate short passes, most crosses completed. So third most crosses completed, excuse me. Again, another guy doing it on both sides of the ball. I love my two-way left back, right back guys. I can trust him, and I think do you listen to Major League Journeyman?
No, I don't.
You should. Dax's podcast is great. Shout out Dax and Dan and Alan Gordon. They are really, really fun to listen to, but they also give really great insight on, the happenings of Nashville, pretty much. Everybody loves Dan Lovitz. Dude is just a pros pro. Gets in, gets it done. How many times has anybody talked about Dan Lovitz this year?
This is probably the first time.
Exactly, right? But he's consistently doing the job. So really, really happy to get him in there because he's been, again, quietly really freaking good. So good job, Dan. Well done.
Hard to argue with putting in the left back from the best defensive team in the league.
Correct. Likewise with the center back. Jack Mayer was better than Walker Zimmerman this year, as far as center back statistics go, which I thought was pretty interesting. Where is Walker? He might not have even gotten enough minutes. Yeah, I don't think Walker cleared the 2,000 minute mark.
He
Which is
surprisingly
probably
didn't play
why.
a ton this season.
Yeah, which is why he's not in there, right? So Jack Mayer filling in for him, eighth least dribble by player out of 34, I think it was a total. Fourth best tackle success rate, seventh least amount of cards, eighth best passing percentage. So again, nobody in my center back list had an average over 15, except for Michael Boxall, actually. So everybody was relatively close, but those key stats there, the tackle success rate was really big for him, bumped it higher. Dave Romney from New England, we've talked about how he was just such a staple of that back line that they went from Omar Gonzalez for 30 games a year to Dave Romney was freaking massive.
Quite the upgrade.
Yeah, least amount of fouls and total cards as a center back is very impressive. Third most clearances, most block shots, second most headers won. Again, doing the things that I look for in center backs, blocking shots, winning the ball in the air, being good in possession. He was good in all of them. So, again, he could have been a little bit better in things like tackle success rate, where he was relatively low. Interceptions, he was mid, but he had enough key statistics there to bump him higher. So
you're missing one very important key statistic for Jack Mayer.
his address.
He's leading the league in times doxed.
We don't know that for sure, though. We have to do a little bit of history research to figure that out.
Are you suggesting that it was a fake house? Or are you suggesting that someone else beats him in times doxed?
I'm suggesting somebody might beat him in times doxed.
Oh God, I hope not.
That'd be wild. But yeah, you had did you have Yamar, who you talked about already, and Tim Parker, who I think is a great shout. I love the Tim Parker shout.
I mean, statistically speaking, neither of these guys are like amazing. I definitely think Yamar's had better seasons, but he was solid enough that I felt I could make the argument to put him in there. I feel like someone I couldn't pull myself to put in here, but looked pretty strong defensively. And I'm curious to know where he lands on your list because he wasn't in your list, so he must be a little bit lower. But it looked like Donovan Pines had a strong season this year, but I couldn't pull myself to put him in, considering his team wasn't great this year. But we could talk about that afterwards. But yeah, I mean, Tim Parker, the statistics aren't great defensively. I mean, he was very good in clearances. He was pretty solid in interceptions. Pretty good in tackles in the attacking third, which is kind of surprising. So maybe he was just very aggressive up the field. The thing for me the reason that I put him in there was, I guess, more of the non-box score statistics stuff. Like, I just think being the leader in the back line of a team that is completely brand new and helping bring that team to top of the Western Conference, a team that so many people wrote off. I think it's just an unbelievable job. And I think he's such a key staple in that back line, even if the defensive numbers aren't super high. And even if St. Louis isn't one of the best defensive teams in the league, I just think his impact would be so sorely missed if he was not there. And so I felt like I had to get him into this team. And then Yamar, I think I already kind of spoke about Yamar, but
yeah, you hit on Yamar already.
Yeah.
Tim Parker, 23rd out of 34, 32, 34, whatever it is. For some things that aren't massively bad, he just wasn't particularly dominant in any one thing, if that makes sense. So he was very good at clearing the ball. Fourth. He was 10th in interceptions, and that's pretty much where his successes lie. 12th in headers won, and 6th in total offsides won. But everything else, he was bottom third. So That's what brought him down for me, is that he was great. And I agree with you. Oh, I'm not in center. I agree with you that if you take him out of St. Louis is not a playoff team. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration, right? But he is so massive. He is so massive to St. Louis. So I completely agree with you in that sense. But for me, based off of the numbers,
Yeah,
where it's at,
he was not dominant in terms of the numbers.
no. I do want to go move on to the 6 here really quick and talk about Junior Moreno for FC Cincinnati. I bumped him out because I felt like the statistics didn't really highlight some of the important things that I was looking for, and I may need to now reanalyze things as we go forward for next year. He was the least dribbled by player with the 4th best tackle success rate. He had the 4th least fouls and the least amount of cards as a 6, which meant that he was going to play. 4th least dispossessed, which means when he got the ball, he didn't lose it. And the 4th best passing percentage. Again, when he gets a ball, he doesn't lose it. I have been a champion of the Junior Moreno undervalued team for years. I think that he is one of the most undervalued center mids in the league. I think that Nwobodo and Acosta get so much focus for being one of the best 6s and one of the best 10s in the league that people overlook Junior Moreno for being just consistently there. He puts all the pieces together. I really, really like the way he plays, but I couldn't put him in as a lone 6 in this group. So I went and put in Darlington Nagbe again. If I'm looking for somebody who's going to be defensively strong as well as keep the ball consistently, Darlington Nagbe's your guy. 3rd least dribbled by player, 6th least in fouls and cards, 4th most headers won, best passing percentage, right? So things that I look for in my number 6 is somebody who can keep the ball, somebody who will win the ball out of the air, who's not going to give away a bunch of dumb fouls. And then I'm also looking for tackle success rate, making sure that you're not getting beaten consistently. He can be better in his interceptions and in his times dispossessed in the press, which is what brought him to the 3rd team. But I don't think anybody can ever go wrong with Darlington Nagbe.
Okay.
Talk to me about your 2 midfielders.
Yeah, I went Ricky Puig. I'll start with him. He's very similar in statistics to Hector Herrera. I think plays a very similar role. He is an attacking engine for the LA Galaxy. And I know that he had a weaker season than I think expectations were set for him. But I think he was still pretty solid. I think he was hurt a little bit by the injuries surrounding him. No Gaston Bergman means that maybe he has to do a little bit. I mean, the statistics say that he didn't, but maybe he had to try and do a little bit more defensive work without Bergman. And no Chicharito definitely hurts as well. But I'm pretty sure Tommy Scoops had a tweet about this. So you can go see his tweet if you want to see the scouting report for him. But it is just all green in everything attacking, passing, ball control. It's like heavy green. He's one of the best midfielders in terms of those statistics. And then you look at the defensive numbers, and it is abysmal. It is abysmal. The highest out of tackles, interceptions, blocks, clearances, and aerials won. The highest percentile he is in is the 8th percentile in interceptions. This man does next to nothing in terms of defense compared to other midfielders. And I know that's kind of tough because he's getting compared to guys like Nwobodo. But he did play, from what it looked like, a lot as an 8 this season, which is why I grouped him in here. I think his attacking numbers were really, really good, and that's what got him into the team for me. But because he did so little on the defensive end, like even less than Hector Herrera, I dropped him down to the 3rd team behind him.
That is one of my favorite tweets, by the way.
It's hilarious
because he follows it up and goes, "Is Diego Luna just Ricky Puig Jr.?" Because Diego Luna is the same thing, but I think he's in like the 89th instead of the 90th percentile, but still absolutely useless in the defense.
He's a regen. That's what he is.
I love it.
And then Artur, I don't think there's much to add there. I think you covered it a lot. Artur is just really good at what Artur needs to do. I'll
Yeah,
leave it at that.
yeah. He is. Dax talked about this again on Major League Journeyman, where when they play him, they're so worried because he is the hardest working number 10 in the league, where he doesn't get a lot of the spotlight because he's in Vancouver. He pulls strings better than anybody, would ever expect somebody of his stature to do. And he's also covering 8 miles a game, tracking runners and trying to win the ball back in a press. He's very, very underrated. And the person I'm talking about is not Artur, by the way.
Yeah.
It's Ryan Gauld, because I was reading the notes that I took, and I was about to ask you, tell me about Ryan Gauld, and then I started talking about him. But I just talked about him for you. So tell me more about your attacking players, and then cut that out, and then slide it over there. And look,
No, that all stays in.
I'm
That all
adding,
stays in.
I'm adding to the conversation. It's way too late to be doing this, and we've been going for way too long.
Yeah. So for me, Ryan Gauld was an easy one to get in here in the third team. I don't think he's quite at the level of the guys that were ahead of him in my first and second team, but really, really strong season and definitely the key piece in the attack for Vancouver. He had 11 goals, 12 assists that helped him be high up in the percentiles, uh, 98th in assists, 88th in shot creating actions, 89th in progressive passes. Was also kind of getting involved in the defense as well. It seemed like he was dropping a bit. 93rd in tackles, 86th in blocks. Obviously not as important, but I think the 11 goals, 12 assists was definitely a heavy reason why he's in here. Granted, I do believe that a decent amount of those goals are penalties, but I still think the 12 assists alone is very enough to get him in the at least in the conversation. And I think he did enough in other regards for me to comfortably get him involved in this team. And then Facundo Torres, I think you'll talk a little bit about him as well. I think it was a solid season for him, certainly in terms of goal scoring. He was heavily involved, 14 goals scored. A lot of those, I think, are non-penalties. Not as much involved in the creative side of things. 71st percentile in shot creating actions and 28th percentile in assists, which I think dropped him a bit lower into the third team for me. I don't think he was quite on the same level as the guys in the first and the second team, but I mean he's a young player. He's starting to get a good foothold in this league, and I think this was a good season for him to continue development into maybe producing on the level of someone like Thiago Almada. I know they have different styles. They're not going to play exactly the same, but to get to that level of productivity for Orlando, I think he's working towards that way, and I think this was a good season for him.
Yeah, I will. I will give you my three attacking players. Well, I talked about. Actually, I didn't, but you talked about Carlos Heel in the cam spot. Not much more to say about it than what you did, right? He draws a lot of fouls, he scores, he completes dribbles, he doesn't lose the ball. He makes key passes, that turn into goals, and he keeps the ball, right? On the left, I got Daniel Shalvey. Again, MLS not known a ton for their brilliant wide players. I mean, they're getting better, but Daniel Shalvey is still the second most fouls drawn, second most shots and goals, third most dribbles, second most crosses completed, second most assists from all left wingers that I looked at on a very poor SKC team this year. So he gets in there again, just maybe for lack of wide players than anything else. Facundo Torres, as you mentioned, some of the key things I looked at here: fifth most fouls drawn, fourth most shots and goals, fourth most shots taken, most goals scored, and sixth most crosses completed. So again, just a pretty good piece for Orlando, as you just mentioned beforehand. So I'll finish up here then with my strikers. Like I mentioned, Julian Carranza, you talked a lot about him, so I won't go too deep into there. But I did like the fact that out of the, how many did I look at here really quick? Yeah, out of the 14 I had, he was sixth best goal conversion rate. So when he shot the ball, most of the time it went in. Alan Polito for me, 14 goals, 31% of Kansas City's goals this year. He is, to me, the reason that they're still in contention on the last day. His resurgence from injury to key player in their attack, absolutely massive. So I think he deserves recognition for that.
Yep. And then my strikers, I think you covered them pretty in depth already, but I have the same two strikers you have for the second team: Brian White, Georgios Yakumakis. Yakumakis is as good as you're going to get for the style of play that he's going to play. He is not going to be creative and getting super involved in the attack like Julian Carranza. I mean, it shows in the fact that he has no assists. He's 29th percentile in shot creating actions. Like he's just not heavily involved in the buildup. But when it gets to him in a goal scoring position, he finishes the job. And that's why he is 98th percentile in non-penalty goals per 90, because he's just a goal scoring machine when he's in the right positions. And it helps when you have a guy like Thiago Almada to put you in the right positions. But
right,
he's made the most of it. He's been lethal. And it's only the start for him. I mean, hopefully he gets more minutes next season and we can get a full season of Yakumakis. I mean, he's in the Golden Boot conversation then. Give him a full season this season of him. He's winning the Golden Boot. I mean, 15 goals in 1,700 minutes. He's already in the conversation for Golden Boot, and that's with like a little more than half the time that the other guys are playing. So phenomenal season for him. Hope to see more minutes for him next year, and hopefully he continues, and hopefully he can continue it without Thiago Almada, because I don't think he's going to have him for next season. But
I don't know, man. Atlanta keep holding out for the right price,
as they should.
as they should. Absolutely.
And then Brian White.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Brian White.
sorry, you can go ahead.
No, I was just gonna encourage you to move on to Brian White because I'm tired.
Yes, Brian White is unironically in this list. I know we've memed a lot about Brian White in the past, but he was so good this year, and like quietly good, because I didn't hear much about him. I think most things going on in Vancouver were pretty quiet, but 15 goals scored. I don't think like any of those are penalties. So he's 91st percentile in non-penalty goals, 90th in shots total. Like he was just in and around the box. He was lethal. He was scoring goals. He was doing exactly what Vancouver needed him to do up top. And yeah, I don't really have too much more to add on that. I think you covered it pretty well already, but certainly with 15 goals, he's deserving of being in the conversation for a MLS Best 11 in one of the teams.
Yeah, for sure.